So here at Grace Anglican, we've actually been going through the Book of Ecclesiastes during the season of Lent. We finished it on Palm Sunday, and I was thinking about the message of that book. Depending on the translation of the scriptures that you pick up, there are two words that one of two words you're going to see all over that book. Vanity. Vanity of vanities. All is vanity. Or perhaps meaningless. Everything is meaningless. Different ways to translate this Hebrew word havel, which means a puff of vapor, like when you have a spray bottle. You see the vapor for a moment and then it's gone. That's kind of the idea of this word. It's a vanity of havel. And so the concern in that book is that everything in life seems to be like that puff of smoke, or that puff of water, or that puff of air. Everything good or bad in this life is here and then it's gone. And one of the big concerns that comes up throughout the course of that book is death. That it feels like life doesn't mean anything, or that life is pointless since everyone just dies eventually at some point. And that is one of the big questions that hits us today, especially on Holy Saturday. Obviously, we know how the story goes. We're waiting for tomorrow or tonight, the celebration of the resurrection of Jesus. But if we're walking with the apostles while we have the chance here, they are in the greatest Ecclesiastes moment of their lives, basically, because their beloved master Jesus has died the day before, and now there's nothing to do. And as far as the scriptures indicate, only the women are going to the tomb, trying to figure out how to get some last-minute burial procedures taken care of. So it's very interesting how our other readings, Job and Peter, both speak to the Ecclesiastes situation that we have today. Job asks a number of questions, and he sounds a lot like Ecclesiastes. The two books have a lot in common, but Job asks some particularly Ecclesiastes-like questions in this bit of chapter 14, and what he is not able to answer, St. Peter is actually able to answer, which is really interesting. If you take 14 verses that we hear from Job and the 8 verses we hear from Peter, they line up really nicely, working together to help us work through this moment of, was this meaningless? Was Jesus' life and death in vain? What's going to come of this? Is this worth it? Was this worth it? So Job asks, he does ask, his opening question, man is born of woman, few of days, full of trouble. He comes out like a flower, withers like a shadow, and continues not. So he's saying, okay, well, everyone dies, and it tends to be very sudden in the grand scheme of things. And Peter answers this by opening his 4th chapter with the fact that Jesus also suffered in the flesh, and that he also died in the flesh. So Jesus has experienced the havel, that meaninglessness or that vanity that life has brought upon us. So the first answer to this lament, the sadness of what seems pointless about life, is that God has experienced the same pointless existence, the same life that ends in death. So first of all, he's meeting us where we've been, or where we are, which is always a good thing for coming to being comforted by someone else. Job's next issue in verses 3 through 6 are about judgment and about enjoying life. He wants to be able to enjoy life, but he also knows that God's judgment is a reality. That he puts it as a question. First of all, do you open your eyes on such a one and bring me into judgment with you? No, if I'm just going to die anyway, why bother judging me? Why not just let me live? Since his days are numbered, and the number of his months is with you, you've appointed his limits, as in God has decided, knows how long people are going to live. his plea is, look away from him, leave him alone, that he can enjoy, like a hired hand, his day. Why should God bother judging us? Can't we just enjoy this life while it lasts? Which, again, is one of the issues that Ecclesiastes deals with multiple times. Peter answers it very interestingly. He talks about judgment and enjoyment. It's not an either-or thing. He says, live the rest of time in the flesh no longer for human passions, but for the will of God. The time that is past suffices for doing that whole list of things that the non-believers do, and they're surprised when you don't join them in their revelries, but there is judgment. So there is a both recognition that, okay, judgment is real, that we do want to live the way God has called us to live, but that there are types of enjoyment which are good and types of enjoyment which are bad. So, sometimes doing fun things is great and fun, but sometimes what you think is fun is actually sinful. There's a couple people in our church who likes to point out every now and then that sin is fun. If we didn't enjoy sinning, we wouldn't do it so much. But we often find fun in the wrong places, and sin is a big example of that, where it seems fun, and it often is fun, at least for a moment. And so Peter is helping us discern between the good kind of partying and the bad kind of partying, a kind of enjoyment in life that is good for the soul and a kind of enjoyment in life that is sinful. Job's third of 4 questions then is about human life in particular. He talks about how there's hope for a tree, that it will regrow if you cut it down. He describes that for a couple of verses. And he also talks about how water in a lake can dry up. And in the same way, so can humans eventually die. And this is particularly Havel, meaningless. This is a vanity. And again, even this is answered by Peter. Peter goes on from judgment and enjoyment to the question of human life, or rather, human death. He makes this somewhat confusing mention of Jesus preaching the gospel even to the dead. In verse 6, he says, "This is why the gospel was preached even to those who are dead, that though judged in the flesh the way people are, they might live in the spirit the way God does." So all of a sudden, judgment isn't so bad because it's not all punishment and it's not eternal. And in fact, even death is going to have its ending. He's beginning to suggest to us. So when Job or Ecclesiastes or anyone else makes their complaint about life feeling meaningless because there is death at the end of it, a big part of our answer is that, well, even in and beyond death, there is life. And that completely transforms our attitude about death. So Job ends his little diatribe with a call to faith. "Oh, that you would hide me in Sheol, that you would point me a set time and remember me. If a man dies, shall he live again? All the days of my service I would wait till my renewal should come." So he's hoping, he's having some faith that God will renew him. Even in the midst of death, he's looking forward to some kind of new life. However much he understands about a resurrection, he's looking forward to something better, despite even death itself. That's also the message of Ecclesiastes. At the end of the day, the best we can do is trust in God and have faith. But of course, knowing Jesus, knowing the gospel that he has died and risen, and that we die and rise in him also, there is a great deal more heft to what Ecclesiastes and Job says about trusting in God. It's not just a cute sort of, oh, just trust in God and you'll be fine. That trust is now built on a really solid hope based on what Jesus has actually done. He actually died and rose again. And Peter does much the same thing at the end of his little section. He says, the end of all things is at hand. So this resurrection is closer than we might think. He calls us to be self-controlled, to be sober-minded, to pray, and most of all, to love. That is the kind of life, that is the kind of enjoyment of life that will last forever. A fun that is self-controlled. You know, when you're partying and you're playing, you get a little crazy, you hit someone, you crash into people, you bump your leg or whatever, or all sorts of other issues that happen with different kinds of playing and partying. But when we bring self-control into it, we can enjoy ourselves without hurting ourselves and without hurting others. Same thing with being sober-minded. We keep our heads on, as it were. And he calls us to pray, and above all, to love. And there we have, maybe not the whole picture of the Christian life, but a very big picture of most of Christian living. And there we find hope, there we find the encouragement of faith, and there the apostles would have found some encouragement had they been able to hear from Ecclesiastes, from Job, and from Jesus while they were waiting for him to come back from the dead. They didn't even know they were waiting for his resurrection, but wait they did, and a resurrection they got. Thanks be to God.